Okay, hey guys. I did my presentation on Asklepios. I hope I'm saying that right, and healing in sanctuaries. So, who is Asklepios? Asklepios is the son of Apollo, and many believed him to be a demigod. Early references to Asklepios describe him as like just this purely mortal physician, and then later he ended up being worshipped as a hero. And then at Epidaurus, at the beginning of the 5th century BCE, he was apotheosized to a god. And this tradition, which was upheld in further sanctuaries in Athens and throughout Greece. Um, Asclepius was worshipped as a healing god and was supposedly able to perform miracles in healing. In ancient myths, Asclepius was able to bring back the dead, a power perceived by Zeus as too powerful and a threat to the division between humanity and the gods. So Zeus threw a thunderbolt at him and killed him. I've read some versions that Asclepius was able to bring himself back to life after that, which I'm not sure about. And then I've read other versions that he was taken somewhere else in the form of a snake. And so I have this video link here for you guys to watch if you'd like to hear the story of his birth and life and death and with Apollo and all that stuff. And this image here is a statue of Asclepius. So Asclepius's family, he's a son of Apollo, like I said, and Coronis, who was a mortal. And his wife is Epione, and he had 4 daughters, Aceso, I probably am not saying these right, I tried, Iaso, Panatia, and Hygeia. And then he had 2 sons who were healing heroes, Podalirios and Machion. The 4 daughters were all named after things surrounding health and healing. And then I've also seen in some versions Hygeia is his wife instead of Epione, and not his daughter. So that's interesting. And then all of his offspring were integrated into the cult and included in hymns, dedications, and sacrifices in Asclepius's honor. And this image here is a votive relief to Asclepius, which means it was given to a sanctuary somewhere by somebody, and it depicts a procession of subjects. So these 3 people here are probably adults, and then the smaller ones are either children or slaves, judging like by the size difference. And then you can, yeah, and then there's the size difference also with Asclepius sitting there, and that's either Epione or Hygeia next to him. I'm guessing it's Hygeia though. And then, yeah, the size difference between him and his subjects kind of shows that he's a god more so than them. But they're bringing him offerings as he sits and chills. So how the cult came to Athens. So before Asclepius, the Greek people turned to a lot of different deities for good health. Apollo, his dad, was one of the big ones. And the Athena Hygeia cult, which someone else might be talking about, I'm not sure. And then around 431 to 423 BCE, at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, the Athenians suffered a devastating plague. The way it was described, it could have been measles, which I'm a nursing major, so I have to tell you all about it. Measles, we have a vaccine for. It could have been typhus, which modern hygiene has pretty much eradicated, but you can find it in some areas where there isn't access to those hygienic things. Or it could have been smallpox, which was eradicated by what was actually the first ever vaccine against a contagious disease. So it's also thought the plague killed nearly a third of Greek citizens, including the leading statesman Pericles and a lot of his family. And the reason that this plague put a lot of people into despair was that offerings and sacrifices at existing sanctuaries and inquiries at the oracles were of no help to the people stopping the plague or healing anybody. So, in response to this, Athenians imported the cult of Asclepios in 420 or 419 BCE and established two major sanctuaries, one in Piraeus and the other in the south slope on the south slope of the Acropolis in Athens. These sanctuaries were basically medical clinics, as well as cult sites, and a lot of people flocked to them after this plague. So this image here I have is an ancient map of Athens. I couldn't find any maps that showed where the Asclepius sanctuary was, like in a map. So it's on the south slope of the Acropolis. So this is the Acropolis here. I hope you guys can see my mouse. So I figured I'd just show you guys a map. It's on this, I hope if this is north-south oriented, it would be down here somewhere. But yeah, so more about the sanctuaries. The sanctuaries were usually located outside of the city or towards the edge of the city, which traditionally would be interpreted as a tense relationship between the god and the polis. But ancient authors explain the placement of the sanctuaries by describing like a need for a natural and healthy setting. And sanctuaries also required a large water supply for various purposes related to purification rituals and healing rituals. So a lot of them were placed near natural springs or other bodies of water. Other sanctuaries of Asclepius were established sometimes in precincts that were previously dedicated to Apollo. They would just change it to be for Asclepius. And they usually started pretty small and then they'd grow very quickly into big public cults. One building that was exclusive to these healing sanctuaries as well was the Abaton. There's another word for it that's really long and difficult. Enkoimeterion is another word for it. And this was a room where individuals who were seeking a cure or that kind of thing would sleep overnight. They'd spend the night and they were attended to by priests, and sometimes Asclepius himself would visit them. And then this other word here, Asclepiadae, were the physician priests who inhabited the sanctuaries and helped individuals. So the priests of Asclepius. A lot of times in these sanctuaries, a lot of people spent a lot of time there. So over time, the people like it because it was very, very popular. So people would don't like set aside money and build temporary lodgings and facilities for cooking and eating. So a lot of the sanctuaries would have a smaller precinct and then a larger precinct. So one would have the altar, the temple, the votives, that kind of stuff. And the other one would be for the visiting groups to utilize or for the people who were just sleeping there for days hoping for a cure. With all the amenities provided and the amount of people staying there, visiting the sanctuary resembled and was pretty closely linked to just everyday life and the environment that it was in. So this image here I have for you is an Asclepion in Corinth. So people would enter at letter A here in the top left, and right here they would come to a basin, a water basin for purification. And then right here is the altar, and here's an offering box. Whoop. And then this was the temple here, and here's the Abaton in the back where people would sleep and spend the night. So worship and healing. So there were festivals in honor of Asclepius, which I'm pretty sure were held every 4 years, like everything else. And I read about one in Epidaurus, the birthplace of the Asclepius cult, where visitors would gather at the civic center and make their way in a formal procession, like that other one we talked about before, a procession to the sanctuary, and they would chant hymns in praise of Asclepius. And upon entering the precinct, they would purify themselves and then offer sacrifices that would end in a formal banquet or feast. Um, they would also have athletic and musical contests and stuff like that. So, yeah, when entering the sanctuary, like I said, purification by washing was required. So, like in that temple I showed you before, the water basin. So, that's also one of the components that requires ready access to water. And, like, one of the reasons that the sanctuaries were usually placed by water, um, people would perform sacrifices as well as bring votive offerings. And these offerings and sacrifices were either brought and given in hopes of finding a cure, or they were brought and given in gratitude for them being cured in the sanctuary. So votive offerings were usually anatomical figures made of clay or terracotta that depicted the part of their body that they wished to be healed. People would also dedicate things like bandages, silver pigs, and goblets. Clay roosters have been found as well, and it's believed that, as it said, cocks were Asclepius's favorite sacrificial animal, and the clay cocks may have been dedicated by individuals who couldn't afford to sacrifice a real one or like any other animal. And at others, there were also like tablets and carved scenes that were dedicated as well. And the biggest tradition in these sanctuaries um, was individuals sleeping in the abaton, or as they called it, incubation. And people would spend the night in hopes of instructions for a cure coming to them in their dreams, or a visitation from Asclepius in their dreams, or yeah, that kind of thing. And individuals would leave the sanctuary either with instructions for a cure, or they would just find themselves healed in the morning when they left. Um, so yeah, sanctuaries for Asclepius were also open to all individuals that were seeking help. Anybody could come in and admire the votives, and there were no regulations on who would be allowed access to the sanctuary or the temple itself. And so this image I have for you is another votive relief that shows an individual asleep in the sanctuary being visited by Asclepius and Hygeia. And that's the reason I kind of guessed Hygeia was the one in the other carving as well. And so the individual's being healed by Asclepius, and as his family stands by there on the left, Asclepius is here on the right, and this is Hygeia. You can notice here as well the size difference of how large these two people are and how small these regular people are in comparison to them. Um, yeah. So miracles. Uh, these miracles were all in our Greek religion source book. If you guys have it and you want to read more, they're on page 109 to 111. The first one they talked about, a lady had a 5-year pregnancy, and she came and slept in the abaton, and as soon as she left, she gave birth to a son who immediately bathed himself in a fountain and started crawling around because he was 5. Um, yeah, so that one's interesting. The next one is also a pregnancy one. The lady came in and she wanted to become pregnant with a daughter, And then she left and was pregnant with a daughter, but she didn't specify that she also wanted to give birth to this daughter. So she was pregnant for 3 years and she returned to the sanctuary and asked to give birth. And so he granted her that. And then she left and immediately gave birth to a daughter. And then the other three you have there are pretty self explanatory. You know, he cured blindness for people, he would cure muteness. The story was saying that he, like, like, I think it was a child, I'm not quite sure, came in and his father was like talking about his how he didn't talk and all this, and then the priest just asked the kid a question, he responded, so his muteness was cured. Or there's stories of healing wounds where he's just wrapped in bandages and the next morning after he slept there, he took them off after he left and like they were just gone. And then this image I have here for you on this slide is a marble head of Asclepius from one of his temples. And then over here I have some images of the votive offerings that were found. Most of these are from Rome, but they're very similar to the ones that would be offered in Athens. So on the left, we have a thumb. So in the middle, we have a torso with the innards exposed. So I'm guessing this guy had some tummy troubles. And finally, on the right, we have a mouth and teeth. And so the votives usually didn't depict the ailment itself, but instead the hope of what the body part would be like after the healing took place. So most of these are just random body parts. And then I did end up finding one in one of my books that I read where it was just a hand with like a bump on it. And that was one of the only ones that people had found that actually depicted a disease or a symptom of a disease or something like that. It could have been arthritis or something they were saying, or a tumor. But yeah, so when votives and other things were dedicated to Asclepius, they became property of the god himself and were forbidden to leave the sanctuary. So naturally, they became very cluttered very quickly. And to help this, because you couldn't take anything out, old or damaged objects were often buried in pits. Or if they were metal, they could be melted down to recast into new cult equipment. So I have another dedicatory relief for you, dedicated to Asclepius by Archinos. And it's so in the background on the right here, you see him lying down and he's visited by a snake right here coming up and either biting or licking his right shoulder. And then in the left foreground, you see him standing there, and Asclepius in himself is touching his shoulder, applying a bandage, maybe something like that. And in the center background is the dedicatory relief itself in the sanctuary. Asclepius is often associated with snakes. And there are a lot of stories describing snakes doing the healing. From my primary source that I'm going to talk about later in that passage, he describes like two snakes shooting out of somewhere and just healing somebody's eyes. So snakes were his main thing. And also nowadays, if you see the like medical symbol with like the staff with the two snakes wrapped around it, I feel like that's got to have something to do with Asclepius. So my primary source I have for you here, I will read it for you. The temple servant put out the lamps and told us all to go to sleep. And if anyone heard a noise, we were to keep quiet. And so we all lay there properly. I looked up and saw the priest of Asclepius snatching the pastries and figs from the sacred table. After that, he went around all the altars to see if there were any leftover cakes. Then he consecrated all of them into a sack. So I this is definitely an ironic interpretation of the priest snatching offerings, because the priests did not in fact steal anything. All offerings were assigned to the holder of Asclepius's priesthood, and he just probably wanted his share of the goods. Another fun fact for you all: Socrates actually served one term as a priest in the Asclepion in Athens. So you could ask him, maybe he wrote something somewhere about snatching figs and cakes. And then another interpretation that I found through my research, I'll read for you. The list of miracles reminds us how, it's supposed to say us, how complex belief can be, and invites us, 5-year pregnancies aside, to accept the reality of psychosomatic cures. And I thought this was an interesting interpretation of like this whole like healing cult and rituals and like the whole beliefs behind this. And it kind of brought like this modern idea of like with the psychosomatic cures. It kind of made me think about like the placebo effect. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Basically, it's like, so in clinical trials, um, one group is given an actual medication and another group is given like fake medication. So it's like probably just like sugar pills or something, and they say, here's the medicine that's going to cure you. And sometimes people who are given that fake medicine end up being cured, and they just get better because they think they're going to get better. So I thought it was kind of an interesting take on this whole cult. I don't know, but that's what I thought. And then here is my bibliography for you all. Thanks for watching.